Hi, I'm Danielle Fountain, the founder of the One Realty in Austin, Texas. And today we are going to talk about what I call Home Buyers 101. So this is great for the first-time home buyer who's never bought a house, as well as maybe someone that is moving to Texas because there are things a little bit different as you go between different states. So this will give you a great expectation of kind of what is happening in Texas when it comes to home buying. As well, at the same time, I'll really hone in on the Austin area. But if you have questions about other cities in Austin, Texas, please, please, please reach out and we can talk about those areas as well. So without further ado, I am going to share the slideshow with you. And we are going to talk about Home Buying 101. So first off, congratulations on taking the first step. So we're going to go over a lot of things. Some of this you might be very, very well versed in. Some of it you might have no clue about it. But just kind of, I want to build the foundation steps, and feel free to skip ahead if you already know some of this information. So first and foremost, we're going to lay out what is the process of buying a house in Texas. And first, you obviously see meet with a real estate professional. And if you're a home buyer, you're a brand new home buyer, it's like, why is this important? Well, your real estate agent is not just the person that opens the door. They shouldn't be, at least. Your real estate agent, I consider myself, is not a real estate agent, not a realtor, but a project manager. I am managing this entire operation. I'm managing from the initial discussions to post-closing when you have questions about having a plumber come out, to the negotiations in between. So I am here to manage the entire life cycle of the home buying experience. At the same time, I'm also your advocate. So when it comes to whether it's negotiating with the other party, if it is working with the title company, or it's working with a lender, I'm going to be your advocate the whole time. And when I talk about negotiations, so the negotiations everyone thinks about, first and foremost, thinks about what is the price of the house? How am I negotiating? Well, you can also negotiate with your lender, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, I'm your local expert, so finding what is happening in the area. As an agent, and we are showing you houses, there's a vacant lot behind you. Well, we need to know how that vacant lot is zoned. You need to know if they're about to build an apartment complex. You need to know if that is a retention pond, different things like that, as far as being a local expert, not just what you can find on Google Maps, but diving deeper in there. The other thing that I'm also part of your team. I am building your team with the other side. So when I say the other side, I mean the seller side. So it's my job is also to build rapport to help in negotiations. So for instance, I just had a client get under contract about 2 weeks ago. It was a brand new to market, fully renovated home. This renovator, they're phenomenal. And people know them. They follow them on social media. They share the life cycle of their houses. And when they finally hit the market, there's normally a frenzy of buyers. Well, I've worked with this agent who's also the seller before and was able to negotiate a deal to get my client under contract literally the day the house hit the market, to the point where we had other agents calling and saying, wait a minute, I had a cash buyer that wanted that house. So having rapport with the other side sometimes helps out. Now, for your lender, why is your lender important? Your lender is incredibly important because, number one, their reputation as far as getting docs in, as far as following timelines, it really, really does matter. A lot of times we might position you and say, hey, consider talking to a local lender who is more hands-on. Sometimes when you get to bigger banks, it's hard for me to pick up the phone on Saturday at 5 p.m. to call the big bank and say, hey, we found a great house. We need her updated approval letter. Or, hey, there's something going on local near this house, and being able to work through it. So sometimes it is good to work with a local lender. At the end of the day, a lot of times your loans get sold off to bigger companies. So you might end up with a big bank anyways, but that local feel is kind of very, very important. They're also part of your stress management team. I will say finding the house and the negotiations for the house is one thing. The second part of the stress comes in when you're actually under contract and you have your lender asking you for things. The lender is, you're asking for more bank statements. You're asking for how this money got into your account. They're asking for what happened at your job, all sorts of things. And so it's really, really important that you have a good working relationship with your lender, because you're going to work with them a lot. You also want to make sure that they're upfront with their cost. And that is important, especially when we start talking about like buying down discount points. A lender might tell you you've got a 6%, but what they might not tell you is that in that 6%, you're getting 6% because you're buying one discount point, which meaning 0.25%. You're buying that down, you're buying that rate down, and there's a fee associated with. So you want to make sure that your lender is completely upfront with you. And we'll talk about those fees in a little bit. Additionally, you want to make sure that they can hit their closing timeline. So when they say they're going to close, you want to make sure they get it, because if it's a hot house and you can't close, technically as the buyer, you might be in default. And if there is a backup offer that might be higher than your house, the seller then could go and sell the house to that other buyer. So having a lender that can meet timelines, that is very thorough, is very, very, very important. Next, we're going to talk about pre-approval. So there are two types of, I say approvals is what you'll kind of hear, but you'll hear pre-qualification and pre-approval. Pre-qualification is when you can go online, you can do this in 15 minutes. You can say, here is what I make, here is what I owe, here's everything that I have kind of related. You're giving them information as far as just filling in the blanks. And they say, great, you're pre-approved for, or pre-qualified. You're pre-qualified for this. That is not a pre-approval. A pre-approval, you do the exact same things. You go in, you say, these are my debts, this is my money that I'm bringing in, these are all my interests. A pre-approval says, great, now show me. So with a pre-approval, you're typically sending in W-2s, you're sending in 1099s, you're sending in tax returns, you're sending in credit card statements. All sorts of stuff go into a pre-approval. So if you get pre-qualified, you're probably going to get it within like 15 to 30 minutes. If you're getting pre-approved, it's probably taking you a day or a couple days, depending on how intricate your approval process is. So it's good to get this upfront as well, because if you don't get a pre-approval in Texas, the majority of sellers won't accept your offer until they have a pre-approval. You might be pre-qualified, but they need that pre-approval letter to show that the bank has approved you. As well, if you find a house and it's a great house, let's say you weren't planning to find a house and it is on Friday night, this house hits the market, you love it, you see it Saturday, you want to make an offer. However, you've not been pre-approved, and let's say they get another offer, you could potentially miss the house. So when you are starting in this real estate search, I would say you need to, number one, find a lender or maybe multiple, and we'll talk about that. You need to go as far as you can in the pre-approval process. Some people don't want their credit score pulled until right before they apply. I understand. If you're with a small local lender, a lot of times that might be feasible. With bigger banks, not so much. But what I'll say is make sure to have a lender and be working with a lender before you start to see houses, as well as a lender can kind of give you an idea of, hey, this is what a house is going to cost you. This is what your loan is going to look like. This is what closing costs would look like on this priced property. It's really going to help you when you start looking, so that you don't go look at houses that are outside of your budget. At the same time as maybe there are houses within your budget that you didn't realize were attainable, but once you go through this process, it does become attainable. So really, really look at getting a pre-approval. With that, how that pre-approval process works, you can choose any lender. You have 45 days to also shop around. So you can apply to as many lenders as you want within a 45-day period for it to be like a one-time hit on your credit score. The banks know, or they know that you're looking and you're shopping around for an interest rate. So don't be scared to apply to more than one. You're also going to have it all like down pat, because you're going to have your bank statements, your pay stubs, tax returns, all of that. You're already going to have that. And what's going to happen is when you apply, they're going to give you what's called a loan estimate. And the loan estimate is going to kind of tell you, hey, here's what the price of this loan is. Here's what it's going to cost you at this price point. Here's where we think it's going to cost you for your down payment, and your monthly payments are all going to be there. Now, what you can do, and why you apply to more than one, is that you can take lenders and you can see if they'll match or beat rates that you receive from other lenders. lenders typically have this like window of, hey, here's where we're approved to give you. We're approved to give you a 6.5%. And you might have another lender that they're a 6.25%. And you can go back to the original one and see if they can meet or beat it. And a lot of times you will be surprised at how much you can kind of go back and forth and get your rate down. I've had people get their rate dropped down by almost 0.5% because they went back and forth the lenders. So the other thing with that is sometimes it's better to do it a little bit early in the process. Granted, they're not going to lock in your rate until you find a house. So even if you get under contract, that is something you could do in the first couple of days. But don't delay, and make sure your agent is aware, if you are doing this, that everyone is in the loop, because you want to make sure you don't miss that closing time frame. Meaning, if for some reason you do end up switching a lender, you have to make sure that new lender can still execute everything within the confines of that contract. And there's also some sellers that they won't necessarily like you switching lenders. So just keep that in mind. But I would say get the approval and start figuring out your interest rates between lenders sooner than later in the process. And then also, you're also going to choose what type of loan. So there's FHA, Federal Housing Authority, there's the VA for veterans, and there's conventional. And if you want to talk about any of those individually, just let me know. From there, the buyer's roadmap, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to search for homes. Well, how are we going to search for homes? So a couple of things. Number one is we have to understand what we're searching for. So you kind of see this list right here about all the different things that you can get in your house. My question to you is, first, you need to identify, is it a need or it is a want? Because if you tell me I need a garage, when we go looking and you find your dream home and it doesn't have a garage, I'm going to turn back into you and say, remember you told me that was a need versus a want? I just want to make sure. That's where I come in and I can play devil's advocate and make sure that we go and we get what you were originally looking for, and that it's not just blown away by a kitchen. So we want to make sure we get those needs and wants. And so really some of the things to think about is your house size, your stories. And I say stories because maybe you have an elderly dog. Maybe your dog's joints as far as getting up and down the stairs. Or maybe you have someone that's going to be living with you that can't get up and down the stairs. So you kind of think about different things like that. You're also going to talk about old versus new. So if you're fine with having a house that maybe needs some renovations versus you're like, hey, look, I'm not handy. I want a turnkey house. I don't want to worry about having to fix anything for at least 3 to 5 years. And that's what we'll kind of talk about, new construction versus renovated homes. Also, when you're buying a house, you really want to focus on what is the lifestyle that you want, because we can find you the perfect house at any price point, but maybe not the lifestyle that you want. Maybe it's way, way, way out of town. Someone built a house on a random lot that's far away. So that's the other thing is to plan is, what kind of lifestyle do you want? Do you want to be in a certain neighborhood? Do you want to be by certain schools? Do you want to be in walking distance to a coffee shop? What does that look like for you? Then for searching, couple things. We're going to do, obviously, it's called the MLS. So that is where all the real estate agents, we got to put all of our listings in there. It's what you see on Zillow, Redfin. It's all of those sites are actually fed from the MLS. So if you're looking on Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, Trulia, Homes.com, you're looking at sites that are fed data from our MLS that we're sending out to you. Now, we also have agent networks. So we have agents where maybe the house has not hit the market or is coming to market, and that maybe is a pocket listing. So we're going to kind of look through. A lot of times you'll see some high-end luxury homes. That's where a lot of them are, I say those homes are going to go, as well as with our builders. So perhaps you're looking for a new construction. New construction a lot of times is not going to be on the MLS. It's not going to be on Zillow, Redfin, all of those big sites, because those builders don't want to flood the market with their inventory. So they'll put like onesie, twosies of their house out, but they might not have all of them online. So that's also why we need to communicate with that. You can also go ahead, use those Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, Homes.com, all of those. You might be driving by and seeing a yard sign. I also say now I have clients that see stuff on Instagram, on Facebook, and they shoot me the listings. If you find something, send it to your agent. Let us take a look to see if we can actually find it. So sometimes there's not prices on it, and sometimes there's a reason that that house is not showing up in your database that we're sending you. It might have to do with the stories. It might have to do with the bedrooms. It might have to do with floodplains, tax rates, anything. And then this high-end automated home search, that's kind of the feature that we set up for you. So we'll send you homes. Some of them will send you automatically if it's like a very, very niche house. Majority of times we will go through, and I would say we do like a concierge mode where we filter out the houses. So we're not sending you every house that hits the market. With that being said, you are on these sites and I'm going to give you the caution, buyer beware. If you are on these sites and you hit request a tour and you hit request a showing, any of these sites, your information is going to be sold to multiple agents. You will have 3 to 5 agents calling you in a matter of minutes because it's the quickest to call you is typically the one that gets the lead. So if you don't want to have to deal with 5 different agents and you want to make sure that the agent that you're working with is a quality agent, rather than going to these websites and just picking up and having the first agent that calls you become your real estate agent, that's when you're going to do your due diligence to kind of figure out the agent in advance. And if you're looking somewhere and you need some help finding a real estate agent, feel free to reach out and I kind of direct you and help you find someone, whether it's in Texas, it's maybe outside of Texas, you're selling in a different state, but you're moving into Texas. I've got a network of agents that are phenomenal that I can refer you to. Okay. Once we find your home, we're going to be touring lots of houses. We're going to find some phenomenal houses. Then when we find your house, we're going to look at a couple things that hopefully will be there in advance. One of those things is called the seller's disclosure. So think of it like a lemon law. Like you can't sell a house with known defects. So we have what's called a seller's disclosure in Texas, and it's filled out by the seller, and it's going to say any known defects with the house, they have got to disclose it. Now, I would be naive to think that sellers actually say everything. That being said, this is why we also do inspections. Once we're under contract, we're still going to do an inspection to see if there's any defects in the house, because there most likely will be, because sellers aren't necessarily as meticulous about all their defects. We are going to go and we are going to have an inspection to find out any known defects in the house, and we'll talk about when that is in a little bit. Now, we found your house. We want to make an offer. Before we make an offer and negotiate the contract, I'm going to do what's called a comparative market analysis. So I'm going to now analyze properties that are very similar to the subject property, the property that you want to make an offer on. And I'm going to kind of give you a, hey, here is estimated what the market value of the house is. Now, this is not an appraisal. I am not an appraiser. Real estate agents, very few of them are actually appraisers. And even if they are an appraiser, they can't do the appraisal on the home that they're selling. So with that being said, we're going to give you an analysis and we are going to tell you where we think the price of this house falls. A good agent will also tell you what's going on in the market. So I like to do a macro and micro analysis. So I like to tell you what is happening in the area. Are home prices going up? Are they going down? Is inventory getting stagnant? Are we seeing lots of price declines? Are we making multiple offers in this neighborhood and people are having to go 5-10%? We're going to do that analysis and we're going to give that to you in hopes that it helps you figure out what home you want to buy. Or not what home you want to buy, how you want to put in your offer. On that side, what is in the offer? Well, the offer obviously is going to include the sales price, which is probably going to come from that CMA, that comparative market analysis. We're going to have how many days until we close on this house. So if you're alone, typically it's like 21 to 45 days. I'm seeing lenders that are even able to do it in like 15, 16 days if you get your pre-approval ahead of time. Sellers don't typically like to have 45-day or later closings, but it could happen. But that's going to be there. Now, if you're a cash buyer, typically you're like 10 to 30 days you're closing. I mean, there's very, very rare times that it's quicker than that. I had one where it was like 4 days before the end of the year and they wanted the house and they were buying with cash. And lo and behold, we made it. But that's typical time frame. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about earnest money. So earnest money is 1% of the purchase price for typically in Austin for resale homes in Austin. Now, I know in California, it's like 3% in different areas. And if it's a really competitive market, your earnest money is going to go up. Your earnest money is going to be almost like good faith money. It's saying like, hey, I really want to buy this house. So you think about it this way. Someone could go and put 10 offers out, but do they have earnest money to put down for all of these houses once they get under contract? This kind of keeps people from doing that exact thing, as well as it kind of gives the seller, if you back out of the contract for non-legal reasons, rather than taking you to court, a lot of times you'll negotiate for the seller to keep what's called the earnest money, that 1%. With that being said, you'll have to deposit it within 3 days of going under contract, unless the third day falls on a weekend or a bank holiday, and then it's the next day. So you're going to want to make sure that you have 1% of the purchase price that you have at least ready and accessible to send via wire within 3 days. Now, if you close on the house, this money is going to go towards your down payment, your closing cost. If you decide to default on the contract, so not a legal reason to get out, typically this is where they negotiate for the seller to take it or parts of it. If you terminate during what we call option period, which we're going to talk about next, you will get your earnest money deposited. So refunded, I say. So earnest money is 1%. This is due within 3 days of going under contract and having an executed offer. Your option money is your next part. So the offer includes the option money and option period. Option money and option period, this is the time when the buyer can complete inspections in the house and they have the right to cancel for any reason. They can just decide they don't like the neighbor that day, or they don't like the way the sun was hitting, it's coming up on the wrong side. They don't like it on the west and it's on the east. Whatever side, they can cancel it. As well as it allows you to renegotiate terms during this part of the transaction. So typically, you'll see anywhere from like 3 to 10 days if someone's really doing an option period. I highly, highly advise you do not waive option period. So I know in some states it's very common to waive the option period or waive the inspections. And a lot of times those sellers have done inspection reports ahead of time. I always say don't waive it. Majority of sellers, even in Texas, will still want you to have an option period, because if you back out, that's also money that they get to keep. But with that being said, how much is option money? Well, it's going to vary depending on what city you are and what price point you are. In Austin, it's typically a little bit higher. So like a $500,000 house, you may be looking at like $200 to $300. You're $1 million house, you might be looking at $500. Now, when we were in the peak of the market in 2021, 2022, during that crazy housing boom during COVID, you were seeing a house that was listed for $250,000 have $1,000 option period money. We were seeing houses that were $1 million houses have $10,000 option period money. People did not want to lose the house. So when the market is hot, typically you're going to see the option money kind of go up if it's very, very competitive. As well as it's also going to go down the days. So those 7, whatever the days that you negotiate, 7's typically what the kind of the standard. Those 3 to 10 days, whatever is negotiated during that time, you're going to go out and you're going to have an inspection. And you do all of your due diligence, all of your inspections. And then let's say there's things that need to be fixed. We're going to either ask them to repair them, or we're going to ask them to put money in your pocket. I typically say get the money in your pocket if it's something that we don't think there's a daisy chain of effects, because sellers are typically going to do it the cheapest and fastest that they can get it done. If we give you the money and we add money towards your closing costs instead, then when it comes time for you to do it, you can pick someone that you want. You can do it in the time frame you want, and you can do it how you want it. And so with this option money, this money is also paid at the same time the earnest money is paid. It goes to the title company. The title company, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is like the neutral party between the buyers and sellers. So they're going to represent both sides of the transaction. And with that, they're going to hold all the funds, so that if you do terminate during the option period, that 1% earnest money, they're holding it, and they'll be the ones that release it. And this is the only time in the entire contract when one party has the ability to terminate the contract, and it becomes what we call a unilateral contract. So during option period, it's a unilateral contract, meaning the buyer can back out for any reason. At the same time, the buyer can ask for anything. The seller might say no, and that doesn't mean the contract terminates. Let's say the buyer then asks for you to drop your price another 5% for no reason. That doesn't mean the contract terminates unless the buyer chooses to do so. Okay. Also, what else does the offer include? Well, the offer includes the title policy. Typically, it depends on who pays, but typically it's the seller. Even in a seller's market, I would say the majority of times you'll still see the buyer do it, unless you've got like tons of multiple offers. Then it might be the buyer that's offering to pay it, and it's a little less than 1%. The home warranty is another thing that we request to be paid for, and typically that is the seller paying for it. It's a typically a 1-year home warranty. So it's going to fix any of your electronics, your HVAC systems, your plumbing, your electrical. If anything breaks during that first year, it's a service contract where there's a fee to pay and then have a service provider come out and repair that. Now, the one thing I realized is not on here is also money towards closing costs. So we can negotiate to get money towards your closing cost to help pay anything that has to do, maybe you're going to do lots of repairs in the house later on. We might negotiate money towards the closing costs so that you don't have to come out of pocket. Next, congratulations, we are under contract. So you've done your application before we got under contract. We get under contract, that's when the processing of the loan happens. So that's when they start, you've been accepted, however, it was not on a specific house. Now they're looking at a specific house. And so they're going to make sure with title that they're allowed to sell the house. They're doing all sorts of due diligence on the back end for the processing of the house. They're also making sure that you are well qualified for. That's also when appraisal is going to happen. All of that's are happening during that processing part. Once it goes through processing, it'll go to underwriting, who will essentially do like the final risk mitigation of the loan to make sure that you are properly qualified, as well as this house is properly qualified in order to give loans and funds. So after that, you're going to get what's called clear to close. So clear to close means the bank has finally approved you. They've also approved your house. And with that being said, during this step, right before we close, about 3 business days prior, your loan officer is going to give you a closing disclosure and loan estimate. So the closing disclosure is going to say what the final cost of this loan is. What is the whole cost of purchasing the house, as well as what is the cost of your monthly cost. So this is like a truth in lending that's required now because people were buying in 2008, not understanding the true cost of buying the house. Finally, after all that's done and you sign on the dotted line, the house is still not yours until it's funded. The house is funded typically it's funded after you sign and after the seller signs. There's a very few occasions where you'll have a seller that will table fund, or a lender that will table fund, meaning they will give the money up front. And once it's signed, and they'll just sign off that, yes, you've signed all the documents, and then the house will be officially yours. The other thing would be is if you're a cash buyer. So if you're a cash buyer and you are bringing cash, that is, you've funded it once you've sent the cash over to the title company. A little bit about your payments. So we've kind of talked about the lender and everything they do, but we want to understand what is in your loan payment. So every loan payment has principal and interest. So that's like the mandatory. Here is what is in a mortgage: principal and interest. Depending on how much money you put down and whether you choose to, you may have what's called an escrow account. An escrow account is where the lender essentially takes money from you every month and builds this big account so that when the taxes are due and when your insurance is due, they have a big pot of money that they're paying off. Typically, if you're under 20%, that you're most likely doing an escrow account. At closing, you're going to pay a portion of this upfront, as well as the seller is going to pay a prorated amount for when they own the home. So if you're buying a home in October, the seller is going to give you proration from when they own the house from January all throughout October, and that's going to go towards your closing costs. But you're going to have principal, interest, your property taxes, home insurance is going to go in there. If you have less than 20% down, or some lenders even less than that. Some lenders don't even have PMI, but it's called primary mortgage insurance or mortgage insurance. And so this is insurance because you don't have 20% equity. So you will typically pay insurance on this loan until you get 20% equity, at which time you can then ask your lender to drop it. Typically, you're looking at anywhere from like $150 to $64. Well, I say that it depends on what the price point of your house is. So you could have mortgage insurance that's $300-400 if you're buying $1 million plus house. You could have it as $50 if you're buying a $300,000 house. It also is going to depend on what your credit score is to determine what is your mortgage insurance. Now, this part is not included in your monthly payment, but you need to be aware of it, is your homeowner association dues. Majority of them will do it in 1 year increments, so you'll pay all up front for a year. However, some of them are month to month. So you need to be aware that that's another cost associated with owning a house if you're in an HOA. Austin, it's hit or miss if you're in an HOA. The majority of older houses are not in HOAs, but there are some neighborhoods, especially when you get to like Round Rock, Pflugerville, you go out to Bee Cave and I say down to Kyle, you're going to see more of them that have HOAs. Now, the other thing we talked about is you're going to have lots of costs associated. So we talked about your closing cost. Your closing costs are a lot more. You might be bringing 20% down or 5% down, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So this is why you get a loan estimate. I keep talking about numbers up front. So when you talk to your lender, ask for a loan estimate. They're going to kind of give you a, hey, here's what we think it might cost you to own a home, and here's all the different fees that are going to go into it. Now, some of these fees are not going to be paid at closing. So for instance, property appraisal, a lot of times will be paid by you via credit card or check when you go under contract before the appraisal's order. The home inspection, you'll pay directly to a home inspector. The majority of these other fees are all going to be wrapped up into your closing costs that you pay when you close on the house. Okay, you've got under contract, you know what your house is worth as far as what you negotiate for. Now we need to figure out what your house is actually worth. So an appraiser is going to come out. So an appraiser is an unbiased estimate of the true or fair market value of the home of what it's worth. So the lender is going to hire an appraiser to do an unbiased assessment of the house. And they're going to tell you, hey, here's what we think the house is worth. Why is this important? This is important because this is going to dictate how much a lender can lend you. So if you go in on a house and you go astronomically high on the price, but the home's not worth that, the lender's not going to lend you money on a house that is not worth that valuation. At the same time, if you get a steal on a house, the lender's not going to give you more money on this first round. Maybe later when you refi out, cash out, refi, they're not going to give you more than what the house is worth when you are purchasing the house. This is just making sure that the house is essentially a good buy. If you are putting more than 20% down, majority of times you can waive the appraisal. That's up to you. You can talk to your lender. If you're 20% down, you're right at 20% down, your lender might do what's called a desktop appraisal to see if they can even waive the appraisal. It might be too close and they might require you to still have an appraisal. With that being said, here's why it's important. Let's say your purchase price is $500,000. You're doing what we call a 95% loan to value, meaning you're putting 5% down and the bank is going to lend you 95%. You'll see this number a lot for first-time home buyers. So they can lend you up to 95% of the purchase price. So you see that $500,000, they can lend you $475,000. If the house appraises for more, so $520,000, they're still only going to lend you $475,000. You're still putting $25,000 down. They're not going to give you 95% of the $520,000. They're going to give you 95% of the purchase price. Now, if it goes down for less, if it's appraising for $480,000, they're only going to give you a loan for $456,000. So they're still going to only give you 95% of that appraised value. What does that mean? Well, that means that you have to come up with the difference for the down payment. So before, when we were only putting 5% down, we're putting $25,000 down, but now there's a difference. So now you're looking at having to bring $44,000 down. That being said, if the house is not appraised, there's a couple things that can happen. One, you can ask the seller to completely drop down the price. They may or may not, depending on the market. Two, you can negotiate with the seller and maybe get partway in between. Three, you can just eat up all of the price and say, hey, nope, I'm okay. I'll pay it all. I love the house. I'm keeping the house. Or four, depending on the clause. So if you're an FHA or VA, the house must appraise. You can walk away. If you're conventional, it's going to be your specific situation. You may or may not be able to walk away depending on what all of your loan information is with that. So appraisals are very, very informative so that you are also making an informed decision on a large purchase. Okay, this is kind of the fun things like do's and don'ts. Where are you? So we're going to be asking you for a lot of information. When I say we, I mean the lender and title company. So get all the information quickly to the lender. Also watch your credit report. I had someone who did not know they had an old Netflix account and all of a sudden it went to collections and it hit literally the day before we closed. And so they dropped their credit score and their interest rate went down. Everything went down. Pay attention to your credit report. Next, for your earnest money and deposit from your personal account, make sure you have your earnest money, that 1%, and your option money available. If you are getting a gift fund, meaning Let's say you have a parent that's giving you money to go towards this. You're going to work with the lender because you're going to have to get a letter that's a gift letter showing where that money is coming from. Stay employed. Notify your loan originator if you are going to receive the gift funds like we talked about, because there is a form for that. Stay employed, and then make payments on all of your debts. So make sure you just keep up with your credit card payments, your car payments. If you have a medical bill, make sure you pay it. You do not want to go into collections. Now, these are the don'ts. They might seem self-explanatory, but don't open any new accounts. We don't want anything changes to your credit score, or transfer funds without receiving like correct authorization. So if you're moving big assets of money, make sure to let your lender know, because they're going to have to account for where that money came from. Don't change your jobs or employers without talking to your lender. So it may not affect you. You might have an offer letter and it doesn't change anything, but maybe it does. So before you do anything crazy, talk to the lender. If you have money that you're depositing into your account that's cash funds, make sure you know where this money comes from. Money has to be seasoned, meaning it's got to have like 2 or 3 days in the bank in order to know where it's coming from. Don't open any major credit cards, or make any big purchases. So even if unfortunately, I had someone get in a car accident. They used a rental car and they waited to buy their car until after closing. They didn't want any big hits to their credit score. We're almost there. Final details. Okay. So we talked about the title company and the escrow officer. They are kind of your neutral party here in Texas that oversees the sales. They're going to do a title search. They're going to make sure that the seller can actually sell the property and there's not a cloud on title, meaning someone doesn't lay claim to the house that has not approved of the sale. They're going to give you the closing disclosure 3 days prior to closing. That's going to show here's what the house is worth. They're also, before we go through closing, we're also going to make sure that any repairs that were negotiated during that option period, that they have been fixed. We're also going to do a final walkthrough. We're going to make sure the house is in the same condition it was when you purchased the house. So if there's not a water leak, a couch didn't go through the wall when they were moving it down the stairs, the windows aren't broken, we're going to check all of that on your final walkthrough. Finally, we're going to make sure your house has been professionally cleaned before the end of the contract. So you don't want to move into a dirty house. We also don't want you cleaning the toilet of the previous owner. We're going to make sure that you have a clean house before we close. And last but not least, on closing day. So in Texas, closing is done in person. So unless you are a cash buyer, closing is done in person and you will need to wet sign. So you're going to need to have a state issue ID that shows that is valid for closing. So whether it's your state issued, government issued. So whether it's your driver's license or it's your passport, it has to be current. Then anyone that's purchasing the property needs to come there and be there in person. If they can't make it, we need to make sure a power of attorney is signed and it is approved by both the title company and the lender for that individual to sign. And the last but not least, the money. So you will either bring a certified check or wire. I a lot of times say wire is probably better because you can do it a couple days in advance to make sure it gets there. But you're going to wire the final funds that you are bringing to the table. Typically, I'd say like to do it like a day or two prior, so that when you're signing, the last thing that we're waiting for funding is of the lender to do the final funding of the loan. And with that, I'm Danielle Marie from the One Realty here in Austin, Texas. I know that was a lot that we all went through, but I hope that this helps. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and congratulations on your future home buying.